This is Paul, and welcoming you to Marigold Farms. We're at last time, 15 months ago. It was the Friday, April 28th, that you see the farm, and it was pretty bare. It was in spring, and we're up here in North Idaho, and up in the mountains at about elevation 2,600 feet, and we do have a southwestern slope, which is to our advantage, but we have trees and forest, and the cold can stay pretty long here. So we have about 3 months, 90 days of frost-free growing. So we have windows on both sides that we have to put in crops that will take the frost, such as peas or fava beans or garbanzo beans, or lettuces and a lot of your kales, broccoli, so on. We are at the unique time now of being able to harvest stuff and planting. This is probably the busiest season is July, and yet it's one of the hottest, and it's like all the chores you're supposed to have been doing is done, but a lot of the harvest you bring in the house, I bring in the house, and then I'm processing late at night while listening to or watching more videos just like this, so I can learn. I'm always learning so that I can teach others, the good Lord willing. So very, very happy to invite you. First of all, right where we're standing, you might recognize the fence, very, very important. We have had a deer stand right there just a couple weeks ago. Literally a couple weeks, a Thursday, and I don't remember if it was 2 or 3 weeks ago. Was standing there looking at me while I'm working here, mowing or weeding or whatever. The pressure of the deer is real heavy, and I just wouldn't have a farm if I didn't have a very good fence. 8-foot high chain link fence, a little over 1,000 feet, encloses about 1.25 acres. I'm really only utilizing about maybe not even half an acre intensively, and we can get in about 3 crops every 2 years. So depends on the rotation of beans and garlic. Right there is where garlic was planted last year, and it was just harvested the beginning of this month. It's in the barn. That is open for short season crop like turnips, 60 days, that can go into a frost in September or something like that. But you also see the trees. Now it's more Paul style, back to Eden Gardens style. Over here we have already the first apples on our summer apple tree. Okay, and I also research a lot of what I put in. I want to make sure it's an apple that will keep for like 2-3 weeks. And literally we have the first apple of the summer apple, and you're welcome to it. And it might not be super ripe, but it will get there. Now, the neat thing is, this was why I put the summer apple out here, and your later, if possible, your later maturing apples further down, is that as I'm driving the driveway, I can see this is ready. This says, hey, we're getting ready, because on a farm you have so many stuff going on, and I have home-based marketing businesses as well, that you can actually miss a harvest. So I come out usually on prayer walks just to go to various areas of the farm to see when things are ripe, because the problem is, once I put the garlic in and mulch it, I'm doing nothing except checking it and harvesting it. And so you got to watch if bugs are there, or as happened there, I did a replicate of the same varieties of garlic here. I did the best garlic here and the smaller cloves of those same varieties out there in the orchard, and most of them were lost to voles and gophers this year, and I lost a lot of trees. So anyway, you can see here how loaded this becomes. This is not its full load. It actually went through several full loads, but I should have thinned that, and that's just a solid bunch of fruit. You can see that. You can almost see it from underneath. Now this is the first year I've also winter pruned my orchard, and I actually have come in summer pruned all of these off, and so I'm limiting the amount of leaves and seeing how that affects and literally all those shoots going up can be taken down. And I used to let them go up because I couldn't prune in the winter, and I use that as stakes, but I have plenty of stakes now, and now I'm seeing that truly with just a few amount of leaves, it does produce still a lot of food. Harvesting garlic in the heat is a challenge. If you leave the garlic exposed to sunlight, months later it will yellow. Also, if it will basically cook. And also, if it's over 90 degrees, it's not recommended that you harvest garlic. So I have a wheelbarrow with burlap constantly protecting it, and as I'm harvesting and pulling up and shaking off the wad, it's quite something. It goes very fast, and you're trying to do it in the early morning where it's not too hot. And then you're pulling up, usually wrap around like this to get the clods off of the root, and then just literally doing it as fast as you can. And then I open the vents in the barn. Garlic takes 2 to 3 months not months, about 4 to 6 weeks to cure. You don't want to dry garlic, you want to cure garlic. And then once it's cured right and it's been grown right, it's amazing how long it keeps. I usually have garlic till fresh garlic is ready to thin, doubles or pears or little garlic that you want to thin out. You can eat the whole stem. You can also snap off the top of hardnecks. That's a real nice taste that cooks light. But basically, this is open for planting, and like Paul says, you're free to plant anytime. I really can't plant. Now, if I did plant here, I do have a system I'll be showing you. How do you plant directly in here? I actually will make a trench and have either 2 or 3 rows depending on what I want. I pour in new sifted dirt. I have a very fast, efficient systems, 2 levels, simple and a little more complex, to pour dirt in and then tamp it with a rake, and then pour your seeds in, space them how you want, and this is for little seeds especially, and then cover. Your bigger seeds like beans can usually take it as long as there is some dirt, right? You can go deep and then you find that dirt, but I want to always start with the dirt. So pull this away because I mulch heavily with the garlic because it's got to survive our winters, but also I don't have to backfill the trench. It's a double combination of putting in new wood chips on the bed for the fall, which is the best time, and covering your garlic at the same time. So I literally have like 3 trenches here. You can see my stakes are part of apple prunings or pear prunings or whatever tree, right? And then they disintegrate and break, and I throw them away. Part of gardening too, I used to not be too much into flowers, but come see the flowers. My experience is I put things in and they usually die. But some do survive. I don't really know what that. You see a bumblebee on here. This looks like a thistle, but it actually doesn't have the sharp points. But it's a very beautiful flower just in bloom now. I got this dogwood, variegated dogwood, a couple years ago at a tree giveaway, as well as this beautiful hydrangea. And it's kind of a nice lime green. Nice thing about hydrangea, this was actually designed to be about this high and then branch. And some lower branches came out and I just cut that top off because in pruning you can do what you want. And it looks so much more beautiful. And the neat thing is this will last all the way into the fall. And they'll just simply brown. They will open and they'll stay. And it's very, very beautiful. Now I bet we had an early heat of summer and pretty much all my lilies are finished. Started with the beautiful red one, but notice I have lilies around the apple tree. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe, I know roses are in the apples are in the rose family. I believe lilies are in the onion family. In hard times, you could eat these. Some lilies, they're tubers in hard times. We do have a lily that volunteers around here, very edible tuber, and I'm trying to think what it's called. I think it's called the Mariposa Lily. So you have a few new lilies in here. Here's one if you wanted to take a look at how beautiful these can be. And these are basically thriving by neglect. And I know it's a very hot afternoon and it's sunlight, and the best time to record or film is in the cloud because you don't get contrast, but we're doing the best we can today. One of the neat things is I've transferred my farm from mostly fruit production to nut production. And the main thing is that I'm gluten-free, and I'm also sensitive to a lot of sugars now. And basically, for years and years in generations past, nuts were considered the bread of people. This is a nut tree I planted this year. It's a walnut tree. So the main nuts I'm doing are walnuts, almonds, and a few pecans. It's been, like I said last time, I don't know if it got recorded last time, but it's been a challenge learning how to grow them. And one of my mistakes this year, and in past years, I left them this long planting, and I didn't prune. I should have pruned way down and let it start, because this is an English Carpathian walnut, and you like the English Carpathian seeded walnut because it can grow food under it, whereas many walnuts do not allow food, especially black walnuts, do not allow food or other plants to grow, with some exceptions like the black raspberry. Well, I want to garden under this, and I'm more and more going to permaculture. Permanent culture means you plant something and it feeds you over and over, year after year, rather than to have to put in crops. And of course, you want some crops to feed you, but you want the permanent culture. There's stories of people in Siberia and Russia who their survival was dependent upon them harvesting nuts that winter. And if they did not have a good nut crop in the forest, they really had a tough winter. And so if you have I believe pigs underneath the forest of walnuts can also eat them. They happily chew them. This is probably, I left tall. All the other ones, I brought in 13 trees this year, and they're going up in price bit by bit. I buy them from a nursery that Paul recommends, Burnt Ridge Nursery. They're up to $10 this year. They were $5 like a year or two ago, and when they were smaller, they were $2.50. So I let this go because it does have partial shade in the morning. And I'm probably, if you look on YouTube videos and really have to do some research, you really should paint this white or put a protector around it, because in the winter is when this blisters and there's problems. It has to come back up from the roots and then it starts over. And I've lost a lot of trees, and then for a year or two later they come up and show up later. But it's always nice to start with the good healthy tree. And I find out where the branch mulch system has been in longer in compost. Once you get them started, they thrive, and so you'll start to see, I'll show you a lot of trees as we're going that are doing very, very well. So most of them, anything that has a white tag is a tree that I'm watering about every week or so during the heat for the first year, and then it's on its own. And so it gets probably 5, maybe 10 gallons of water. I pull the hose and we'll water it. Sometimes you can start stretching it as you see it healthier. This is basically just starting to curl in the heat. It probably will survive. It's going to be a touchy thing, but our heat should break pretty quick. This is giant phlox. And as you can see up here, this year I put in a row of asparagus. Maybe we can reset. This is purple passion asparagus, and again, once in a while I water it, but I've been forgetting or neglecting it. You see beans, pole beans on the back side, and then I believe this is a green bean on the front side. I've had rabbit damage. You can see all of these have been just mowed off. I'm guessing it's rabbit damage. I've been taking care of a few rabbits, and we have their little bunnies showing up now and then. This is its first year, and it's doing very well on the asparagus. And so I learned the last couple years I was starting to not see stuff green on the grounds, and I realized I needed to add more nitrogen. You can keep adding wood chips, but sometimes like this right now it's just about a foot over basically rock ledges. As you can see the dirt out here, it's I've mowed there, but it's pretty poor soil. Kind of has a lot of drainage, and so the moisture that there disappears. But so this may not break down as quick. A lot of this was built years ago with a lot of compost. But even then, if earthworms are finished, processing it, and you don't feed them good stuff, there has to be some sort of adding nitrogen to it for our short seasons. And so I'm seeing a lot more improvement wherever I've had the beans or some sort of nitrogen fixing crop in place. One nitrogen fixer, give me a moment to think about it. Chinese yellowhorn, you can see it here. Slow growing, but it has nuts that are used, if you research, being used for oil seed and possibly even biofuels. There's another one right here, and there's one right behind you. And it looks like it could use a little help, a little cover, and some nitrogen itself to get going. This is a mulberry tree. I've had tried to plant mulberries here, and they kept dying for years. And this is very, very rocky. You can see the amount of rock here, over here. I also had a problem with trees over here because of a ponderosa pine that was taking all the nutrition. And where that walnut is that I just showed you, I put in many trees that have died. And so I realized this was starting to hog it. And this may grow up and do the same, but not as bad as that ponderosa pine. So finally we have some success continually building it up. While I don't eat the berries of a mulberry, I do eat the leaves. It's a tremendous food. Thanks to Matt, one of your viewers, and you did an introduction to. I learned, he put me on the fact that the Adirondack Indians, their name means leaf eater, and that he told me all about, we learned about what are edible trees. Very few people know this, but I'm actually, I think the beech now, or linden tree is something I'm looking into. Growing here. This is one of the best. It has some of the best omegas for brain fat and so on. It really does thicken up green drinks. You can powderize it, put it in food. It's amazing. And of course, how would you eat it? As you thin it, you take the whole branch, you can eat the tips and all the leaves. You can eat fresh or dried, mixed with food, put oil with it, treat it like a salad. Bitter herbs are really good for people for digestion and all. And this now, you'll see many mulberries trees sparse, throughout the place. I get from Burnt Ridge like $20 covers 10 seedling mulberries. And they're Russian seedlings, so I'm not worried about the type of berry, although I do have some name varieties, which are about $20 a tree. But this is a great way to have a lot of food once you get them going. Now, another principle here, if you look down around it, is as I'm weeding areas, the weeds go right on top as mulch. So you don't have to worry about where's the compost pile to dump my weeds, unless the weeds are a seed or a vine that it could replicate. I simply put all of it to feed the trees, and that's why they do well. So, weeds are my friends in a way. They put me to work, but they also are feeding me with what I can eat. We're constantly in the process of pushing the edge when you can, right? So this is like the edge. I should have been able to mow in there. I've had to let it go. I would change the way I set this up. You see all those big bushy green plants are Comfrey. And I don't remember if it's Bocking 4 or 14, but you can get it from Co's Comfrey online. He does a very good job. One order back in August, many years ago, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, and he sent me 10 extra little slips. And from that, there's plenty of Comfrey. They're deep miners. This type does not go to seed and propagate by root or by seed and take over things. They pretty much stay where you put them. I put them too close to trees in the past. The place I would put them right at the fence. Then it would prevent weed invasion. I've seen some videos on that. But it also prevents your fence is where everything wants to grow. There's a tiny amount of shade. It catches rainwater. It drips, your frost or whatever you do in the morning. That's how stuff grows on the fence. And then you have to brush cut it, which is very difficult on a fence with a blade on metal. I would redo this and bit by bit have all my fence have this, and it's a weed perimeter because as you see, once you weed this side, they're pretty much not coming or sneaking up, because if you have them block one after another, they're the vegetation, they're a wall blocking the fence. So definitely little things to know. What I am trying to do is avoid, so I'm going to have to brush cut as soon as I can, avoid having these seeds come back onto the growing areas, and that can be a problem. So even Paul has weeds, but the weeds you do have are easy to pull. Some weeds I leave. Like this, I forget what this is, something Castlemaria grandiflora or something like that. It's annual, but the deer eat it, and we only really see it inside where the deer can't get. You'll see some markers. What are all these markers for? They're where I'm planting on my next set of walnut trees. And eventually, because the price going up, I've been learning to plant, looking for seeds, to learn how to grow walnut trees. I found a source about 200 miles from here, a tree that produced 200 pounds of walnuts last year. It's not typical, sometimes they go into a every other year mode, or depends, but they didn't germinate because they were left out in about 2.5 garbage pails outside all winter. We had a really, we had a heat wave in January, and we had a really deep frost in February, and so it's not live food. So the best food for you is food that is, if you planted it, would grow. It still is. The man generously gave me quite a few walnuts, like a 5-gallon bucket and a box full. And so this fall I hope to go and get them and start them correctly. But it was disappointing. It was probably because they were too deeply frozen, and they can take some frost through a winter, right, but not that heavy. And so I'm trying to learn to grow them, and you can propagate, find thin shell ones that are easy to crack. Literally, there's another one in the local area. The shells are very, very hard to crack by hand. You have to almost I do take a hammer to it. So you're constantly looking. As I'm growing, I'm also thinking of the barn that cures the garlic will also be able to dry the walnuts in sacks, and then I'll probably have to get equipment to break down the walnuts. Why walnuts and why almonds? I soak almonds in the morning, go probably through about 1/2 pound of almonds every week or two, and probably 1 or 2 pounds of walnuts a week. This is my bread. I don't do any bread or grains, no milk except a colostrum product, no, not much meat, only a little bit of fish, but pretty much I'm plant-based and feeling much better for it. And so you got to have good protein and a good fat, such as most nuts are about 2/3 fat, good fat for you. And so it's literally my bread. And so who had thought, it was very painful giving up bread, and my last sandwich was like January of 2 or 3 years ago. Very painful because it makes you want to feel full, but I'd rather now have more energy from good food that you can grow right here, I am growing grain. I'll show you this, my first year growing grain. I plan to harvest it tomorrow, about 90 days after I first planted it. And on April 26th, I'll be harvesting it tomorrow, July 26th. And I'm pretty impressed.
We were talking about Comfrey. I grew Comfrey for the first time this year from seed. And it was awesome.
Very good.
And it's all going to seed now, so I need to start pulling that.
Yeah, each of these are one root.
And do you chop it up and drop it, or do you eat it, or do you dry it?
I don't eat it personally. Some people do, but This is the most edible strain that even chickens and goats, every animal can eat. One of the others, you know, a couple of the animals can eat, but this is the best. But it also depends where it's growing on. Comfrey also, you see all those bumblebees in there. They're constantly pollinating it. I'll show you how I chop it. Ideally, I would chop the perimeter of the fence or wherever it is if I had time and refeed the trees, just like I did here. I had a big thing of comfrey growing here, so this kind of brown stuff here is dead comfrey. Comfrey decomposes very, very quickly. You can take a leaf and wrap it in a potato, and within 1 day buried in the ground, it's feeding the potato. It breaks down very, very quickly. Very high, I believe, in potassium also. But it's not a nitrogen fixer, but it's a bioaccumulator. It grabs what is leaching down, it goes deep and pulls it back up. And which is the principle of branch mulch. Your trees are deep miners. You're getting the minerals that you can't access otherwise through what they bring up in more bioavailable form in the wood chips. You see in this area, you see some logs showing up every once in a while. Some, you know, if I have extra logs split, I'll throw it in, and then this was all tub grindings, a much coarser grind. These are 3 almond trees. That one's probably not doing so well because the comfrey is pretty close to it. But once they get the message, they can go deep-rooted. Some things do very well next to comfrey. Other things, it's a competition for water. But in a few years, that'll probably be taken off, just like these other 2 trees. Again, this is a walnut tree, 2 years. Why I have it caged is we had, I believe it was rabbits gnawing on them or gophers. And so now I don't necessarily do it, and they're doing well. Probably my fastest growing tree, walnut tree, is right up here. I planted this last year, and you can see how the mark of it was right here. And it had kind of a curvy bottom because, you know, sometimes the main stem dies, you have to start with another stem. But once it gets going and it taps into this tub grinding pile, which was a complete block, I could not see, you know, anything over it. And in just 2 years, it sunk this much. It's probably tapping into there, and it has put on so far. And you know, walnuts come out very late, especially once they get the sense of, you know, they get dieback and frost back and all, and they realize, oh, you know, I've got to wait till after a few years. They pretty much know to come out very, very late, so they're not damaged by spring frost. Well, since coming out late, from there to there, it's still growing. And that color in the tip, that mineralized, that rich, rich color tells me it can still grow more. Once it starts to turn green or pale green, that's pretty much saying it's done for the year. But that's what you like to see, is those tips constantly have that rich color. It means it can do it. And then you want to see your leaves get from baby leaves, right, to big and thick and deep green leaves. So it can be sometimes a matter of throwing fish oil on or something, or constantly feeding it. But fish oil is a good thing, and then blood meal. Sometimes have to once in a while do it, especially if you see a yellowing of leaves. Or in some cases when the tree is small and it's not taking the heat well, it's all yellowing, I will actually take burlap and cover a portion. You might, if we have time, we might get to see some of those trees that are currently under cover. Literally has saved some of my trees, because you think about it, baby trees actually grow at the edge of a forest and around a mother tree that provides the coolness and the shade. Even if it's out in the sun all day, that coolness coming is going to spread out from the tree to the immediate area. And that's why I have zucchini near the forest. Even though right now it's in the hot blazing sun, it produces like crazy. Anything in that area where that cool forest, the air can come in, and it affects, it's a microclimate next to the cool forest, because that cool air is constantly, the heat is rising and the cool keeps spreading. So it's amazing how a forest, near a forest, can really, really help. Now, this is pretty much no shade, but someday soon, You know, give it a few years. By 9 or 10 years, there should be a pretty good canopy over this entire thing. And then you can do cool crops all year, all summer long. And that really makes a difference. One more thing about the walnuts is that I am putting walnut trees about every 24 feet. So that's about 8 paces. If it's a little tight, I'll put it for 6. I don't want to have it near the fence because you have to think of the English walnut grows. Roughly, a huge one would be 50 feet by 50 feet. A medium one would be about 25 feet by 25 feet. These are pears. I will probably be taking out some of the apples, especially the Honeycrisp, because they tend to have problems. They were developed for, big, juicy, sweet. But these are pears, and I prune them just basically. They're very close, according to Paul's standards, should be 18 feet. They're my first, these 2 rows of apple and pear trees are my first experiment. But it's similar to what they do in, I believe it's Western Washington or Mid-Washington. What they used to do is grow apples like grapes, very close, and it doesn't always work. You have to have plenty of workers, and there's a whole system. But this has been my most productive pear tree. It's a little out of production now this year, but these are coming on, as you can see, and this one is pretty loaded. The pears get as big as this. Pears get as big as this. Massive. And literally, when someone comes to visit, I'll find them. You don't have to worry when they're ripe. They're on the ground. 5 people came on a tour one day. There were 5 on the ground. So literally, you don't have to go high. I've already summer pruned it, and already you've got spurs going up, and it's doing very well with what looks like very limited leaves. So I could still keep pruning, but you do have to leave so many leaves per pear, right? What is it, 16 or 20? Like for every bunch of grapes, I think it's about 15 or 20 leaves. Ripen a bunch of grapes, as long as they're healthy. But once they start to fade or die, there has to be more leaves. I actually cut this because it was so low. I cut it. I don't want it on the ground, but you can see that's not too bad, and it looks like it's a little stressed, but they're doing good size for the end of July. And of course, if I have time, I go in, and these suckers can be taken off. This is a little bit beyond, but you can take them off gently like this, or snap them off. Sometimes I'll put on my gloves and just go like this. But at some point, you get to a point, if you tear it, you can also tear quite a bit back. You want to avoid that, and so sometimes I'll do a double back and forth like this. And when I'm really into it, it can go pretty quick. And then I would probably go back and finish pruning that. I don't want that coming back. If you want to prune, think if you see something bad and it's doing something wrong, but you don't have the tools, I would go ahead and break it. And then when you have a chance, save your tree or suckers or whatever, and then come back and prune it at your time. But I told that to a farmer friend, and he really appreciated that. Sometimes someone has to give us permission to do things, right? And of course, you can always feed the tree. But the trees I really want to feed, let's go down here. Are the mulberries. And so I had fed them each so much. These are, with the exception of the blue ones planted last year, and I believe they were potted, I planted directly this year the rest of the mulberries here and a few in other locations. And they're very close for a mulberry tree, but I'm going to let them go, try to get a stem about this high and then branch out completely, and then from the branches, that's food. And then you can dry that into a powder, and that's chlorophyll and all kinds of good things for the rest of the year. And you see turnip tops, all of the stuff coming from the garden as I'm harvesting can come here. All of the prunings, you can see dead apple and pear leaves, and their stems, they're green, and I just finished clipping the stems. That's good compost. It'd obviously be faster with the wood chipper, but and I'm looking into that, but the budget doesn't allow it right now. I have a few things you might like. I think I have a plum or two here. I thought I did. Ah, there we go. Ah, you learned Paul's trick about shining up an apple, yeah.
That's just amazing to see when it does it. Yeah, that's just pretty right there.
That wax is good too.
So good.
I lost a lot of apricot, nectarine, and peach trees last year, but I don't regret it. This last winter, you know, from that heat in January and then a really deep cold snap in February. I actually have a problem with those trees with our damp springs. They get peach leaf curl, which only dies at 80 degrees. And after bearing a year or two, they can no longer take the burden, and they were dying on me anyway. So I said a prayer, if they go, I'm not worried about it. So I've been replacing with almond trees. Some of those white flags out there are almonds. And you can also see out here more and more beans. These are dry beans, and they of course have to be planted after the last frost date, which we're lucky if it's the middle of May here, but sometimes we've had hard frost in the beginning, at the end of May. You're going to get a frost anytime, but usually it's a pretty much a 90-day window. These are topset onions, and in the spring they're the first food to really come out, and so you can harvest the tops as greens. You know that this part you just come and you clip it, and there's still some you could do right now. We'd probably harvest that, and then the top has those little balls, and I used to wait till they were dry and then I would peel them, and I started saying it's too much time to peel. I just threw them directly into my veggie dishes, and then I realized when they're green is the best time to harvest them. You can then separate them and put them directly into quart bags, and then you have stir-fry material in veggie dishes, little onions. It's a real treat. So I had these planted by the trees, each tree, and it was too much. Now I can harvest all, take care of it and harvest it all at the end. Plus, it seems that when I have garlic next to cherries and all, the trees don't do too well. And so, it's part of learning what works with what. So these are lilacs. Every other row I have a lilac at the end for beauty in case we have tourists or whatever, but I think they're getting carried away. Might regret, It seems funny, but the stuff that doesn't produce food for you does real well. Yeah. Have you noticed that? It's a struggle to get food to grow. There's another walnut in a cage right over there. And that's planted last year and doing well this year again in the branch mulch system. Okay, I think we'll do here. I'll give you another treat. I think this is the ripest one.
What do we got here? Apricot?
Yellow plum. I think it's called Shiloh. And I think it's from Rain Tree before I knew about Burnt Ridge. But if one of those companies doesn't have the product, I think they swap with each other to provide, to fill in for each other. They're about 30 miles apart. I think it's in Onalaska, Washington, or somewhere in that area. Okay, so what is this? This is our wheat, Ethiopian blue-tinged emmer. And this is my first time doing wheat and seeing if the Back to Eden garden method of branch mulch will work. So I planted this, it was, when do you plant this stuff for your area? So I found a site that has a percentage of a state being planted in wheat. And as I saw it increase to 10 or 20, I says, you know, it's about time. And on April 26th, I planted it. It's a 90-day wheat. It shatters very easily in the head, so it doesn't need thresh. The hole is not, in old grains, is oftentimes very tight on it, right? But I was looking for something that I don't have to do that work or have special machinery. So I have to collect it in time, right, before it shatters all over. And so it was doing well. I had a friend come up, he knew of wheat and grains. Your older grains have longer stems and they tend to lodge easier, but we had a terrific storm come through. It's stronger, whereas other farmers with shorter wheat, because they want less stubble and more grain, that's what wheat has been bred to do now. This has longer stems, so it's about 2.5, 3 feet tall, and it even after that terrific wind, most of it was standing. I count it a little blessing, because I've been blessing and praying over it a lot to see how it grows. You really are dependent. One wind could just knock everything flat. It tends to all be leaning that way because of the prevailing wind, though, and so harvesting will be, you know, pretty creative. Then I had birds come and eating even the green grain. They were anything that was down on the ground, probably either doves. I hear what sounds like mourning doves, or we have birds, robins, whatever. Something was stealing the grain, especially that fell on the ground. So not only that day did I net it with this, but I also held it from being on the ground, because if you're not careful, birds will even get under here or get right here. What they were probably trying to do is break it down, and then they can peck it on the ground, and then they were breaking the heads off to see if they were ripe. And that was way too much damage for me on, you know, from first getting it started. It's pretty precious seed. It was started about 2 decades ago. A guy came back from Ethiopia with a couple handfuls, and now there's several thousand acres in California and Canada, maybe Oregon and other places, that are now being grown in it. It's very low gluten, and so that's why I was looking. One of the reasons I'm looking at it is the fact that I can't tolerate gluten in most grains, but this is something that I could, you know, look to use, or to help people understand what can be done. Maybe someday they'll come with gluten. Gluten's important for bread to rise. Anyway, and there's an almond tree this year that I planted in there. So I don't know if you want to come in a little closer and see the grain, why they call it blue tinge. It has a brown with a blue or purplish tinge kernel on the inside. And I will probably be drying it for 2 to 3 weeks. Actually, probably not drying, again, curing or whatever it does. It gets the, develops the bacteria on it that help you to digest the grain. This is also a first year doing Daikon Radish. I was tremendously impressed the amount of food that this gives. I had 2 big beds in Daikon. Over there is the remnants of these. These are what is left for seed. If it took, you know, you do the little garden radish and they're iffy or whatever, these literally just bolted up, massive little primary leaves. I went through and thinned. Way I thin is I sit on a square milk crate, and I can show you. And as I'm thinning, I'm also weeding. That's what this tool is in the branch mulch. Sometimes if you pull a weed, you don't get the root. You want the root with it, you just go down and wiggle a little bit of the hole, it comes right out. So this is what this tool is. Been very, very handy. I was using like a pitchfork or a broad fork to help, but it tears up too much of the ground. I needed something, it could be a little bit thicker, but something like with the tine of a pitchfork or a tine of a single broad fork to go in. And I have weed pullers that just bend, right? They bend and are worthless. But something a little stronger, but this works for now, you know, to get around there and pull out some stuff. But I don't know if you got a close shot of the size of these roots. They're obviously too fibrous, and about a month ago they became too fibrous to really use. But you can see half the radish sits above the ground, and that's a small one. Here's another one, okay? And the rest of it, they can get this long, up to this thick, And the rest of it is a root that keeps going, and it tends to go very straight and will go through hard pan, and it breaks up soil. And the only thing is, you can leave these here and let them rot, and they will have a sulfur smell, but then it's broken up the soil for next year's crops, and it's tremendous food for the crop. So it's not a nitrogen collector, but it is a bioaccumulator. You can look up YouTube videos of people on farms do it. Then they let their cows graze, and they graze, even in the middle of winter, they're digging up the radishes and have food. So some of them are pretty massive. This guy's pretty massive. Let me get in here. And now this is real fibery, but if you had to, you could actually take it out. Depends on the stage it's at, and you could actually take that fiber off, and the inside will be a nice core. It's very, very juicy, and it's been a real help for me. A lot of people can eat the radish, mix it with meat, stir fries, whatever, and it really, really is a digestive aid. Then, of course, I'm trying to get the seeds. The seeds are very large if you get it, and so that's why they sprout and go. It's just tremendous energy they produce very, very quickly. And I was surprised how in the branch mulch they went through pretty hot weather and still grew very well. There's a lot of thinning involved, in spacing. The thinnings, the entire plant is edible at that small stage. Right now, if you were starving, all these seed heads could be, anything that's tender could be eaten. Even the pods, when they're green, full of seeds, can be eaten. And of course, then the seeds themselves can be sprouted and eaten. It's amazing how much, it's just not one piece of food you can get, but multiple layers of food throughout the year. These are Hawthorne trees volunteering. When I finally grew some hawthorn tree, I found out what the weed looks like, and then coming in the branch mulch, you get all kinds of weed seeds. You get little pine trees growing. Have you had that experience? And they're a weed unless you want them, right? Well, the hawthorn I definitely want for the edible leaves, and not for the berries so much, but for the leaves and for the entire bark. They are thorny, but you can work with them. And the bark, the stems, you cut into little pieces, throw in to make a tea, leaving it in hot water like I do it in glass. And it's a beautiful pink tea that I then add. It's like my liquid other than water that I'll be drinking. And sometimes I'll do bean juice into my salads or whatever, but tremendous, beautiful pink tea that is lovely, and it's good for your heart. I've had health problems. You can see this row of trees here are hawthorn. That first one was planted by the Lord through a bird or whatever. The rest were in pots for a couple years, and now they're doing very well. There's actually one there. Sometimes you have birds land on them and destroy half the tree. You simply take that branch, clip it, use it for food, right, or for drying. I put it in a brown paper sack just on a regular basis, or eventually have a food dehydrator. But I usually can just dry stuff as long as it's not directly in the sun. It's completely enclosed like in a brown paper bag. It will retain its full color, and as long as you don't let it dry too slowly or in a humid environment, it will not get moldy. That's one thing. You don't want too many layers in the paper bag. But then plenty of fresh twigs that are sometimes, it comes out earlier. It's one of the earliest things to grow around here. Way earlier than asparagus, and it's sometimes more flavorful than asparagus. Depends on if we had a wet, cool spring. The tips are really, really delicious. Now, if it's a little bitter, put it in a salad like you would any other food, a radish or something, and put it with oil or lemon juice. Flavor it the way you want. You then get the minerals and the nutrition. And so right here you see another hawthorn tree, and I put little stakes, right, when they're first babies. And I could actually trim this and take one of these as the new tree or transplant it. And I'm thinking of doing one of these rows as a hawthorn to really develop, nice leaves and just for harvesting. Here's another mulberry doing very well. We're finally this year that we're finally getting to the point of putting on bigger leaves. This is not quite as lush as I'd like. This other plant here is doing better. But I find that if you just thin out every other one, these leaves all of a sudden, it takes off again. And see, this isn't stopping growing. And The cherry trees, I've lost a lot of cherry trees to the bark peeling as they go. I'm saying bye-bye. I don't eat the fruit. They tend not to have a whole bunch of worms, but once in a while worms. But the birds, you just can't keep the birds from loving them. So this is the zucchini, 20 plants out of 20 plants transplanted that I grew from seed, that I waited way too long. 19 survived. They were yellowing when they were little, and I ended up putting blood meal and fish emulsion, the stuff you get from Home Depot, cheapo stuff. $10 or $11 a gallon back then. It could be more expensive, I don't know. But doesn't need much, and it finally got it. Once it gets it though and gets into the deeper zone, it takes off. So this year, as I'm getting older, I've set up more and more workstations. So I come out with the knife, put my pan or my box here, and then load it up, and instead of having to bend all the way to the ground, I now have workstations. I can then take that at a better level and take off with it, right? Because it's amazing. I just harvested this morning probably about 20-25 pounds. Harvested last Saturday about the same, and they just started about a week and a half ago. And this year I'm really trying to catch them small, but they still in a day or two will get very big. And so I'll show you, if I have a moment, what I harvested this morning. So these workstations came down from a tree, one of these logs, from a tree that was sucking up all his lovely nutrition, the branch mulch. And then in the winter, I need my exercise, which I've learned over the years, you know, even in winter is when I feel the worst because I wasn't getting exercise. I'll come and cut a tree down, and then I'll chop on it. And these are next to be soldered, chopped on, right? And then the branches are right around here, all chopped up, right? So I have a nice axe, a long-handled axe, medium size, that I can get a real swing on some of these big branches, and put in about an hour or two of work every afternoon, and prayers too sometimes. So now, talking about the space of my trees, some of these trees literally were where I'm going, you know, where I had branch mulch, and so I still have to water it every week or two if there's no rain, but they seem to do very well as long as you get down to the dirt and then do the same mulching. I don't want to later, when this is gone, have missed the opportunity to plant some trees. Same over here. This is very thick tub grindings right here, and I had to dig a ways down to get to this guy. But he's at a good distance from the fence, right? I don't want to have this thing producing nuts and then I have to go to the other side of the fence, especially if it someday should ever be someone else's property. But there we have it. Again, this year when I learned that these were very, very tall and they were just like little leaves on the top, and I realized that that little set of leaves had to pull up the nutrition so high, and when they're small, that bark tends to blister and get hot, and then it cuts off the circulation. What I would do if I didn't prune it, I would plant fava beans or something that grows very high around it. I have one tree in asparagus doing very well, buried by the asparagus, right? But it's being covered in shade, natural shade, and has plenty of air to get to it. So I forget, the beginning of June, I think, I went around and cut all these down that didn't have some sort of shade or something. And it was really a test that they would grow back, right? And yet they have grown back, and it will probably save a lot of problems. I've had a tree that grew from last year so high, and then it started from a side shoot because most of the top died. And so it's coming in strong. The roots, every time you do it, no problem, the roots are getting bigger, but I'd like to eventually have the thing grow, you know, very uniformly quickly and get to nuts sooner than later, because I'm getting older too. That's something you have to consider. Better to learn it sooner than later. But of course, you know, after my lifetime, it's a gift to whoever then gets to utilize it, unless they're unless they really have to, or they're crazy and don't see the value and want to develop. and only put in their barn, in their garage, and not realize the potential of the food. You know, when you consider walnuts, 200 pounds of walnuts from a single tree at today's prices, that's a significant amount of food. And if we were starving, you really couldn't put a price on it. So plenty of work everywhere. These are some of the trees that died. I might give you an example. Some of the gophers were eating trees this big. This one right here is a good example. Let's see if I can get it. Okay. Do you see that right there? It's about 1 inch thick, right? I don't know if you can see it in the... That was gnawed by a gopher. I literally, 3 of these trees could twist out of the ground. So if these had a hard winter, so did the gophers. They must have been pretty desperate to go through that much wood and that much root. So I have a friend that he recommends when you plant a tree, they were planting glass, broken glass. I've looked for it, I can't find it. I've also probably will start putting a lot of ash or even human urine or blood meal or something that they don't like in the hole when you're planting it, to at least not have them come that close in. Really, when you have a gopher problem like I do, you probably want to put in 2-3 times more trees, and then you're blessed to have what survives. I have noticed that our driveway is just gopher pocked, and here's the reasoning, I think. When you eventually have weed-free branch mulch area, there's no roots for when they're tunneling for them to eat. A gopher, from my research, has to eat every 30 minutes or it dies. It's like a beaver. It has that beaver look teeth, right? Constantly gnawing and has to constantly wear it down. If it's not constantly gnawing and eating, it gets lockjawed. I mean, whatever, the jaw tightens up. So the teeth grow and then it can't eat. So it's constantly digging and eating. And it can only find it where there's grass. And once you use the branch mulch system, in general, you should have no problem with gophers. But if you do, it's hard to find them because they'll be able to tunnel completely without putting up mounds above it. Have you experienced that? Because you now have, just like potatoes growing on Paul's place, it all flexes. You don't have to mound up dirt around the potato. Well, also they're able to go and do a lot of tunneling and don't have a place to put the dirt. Inside, one of the reasons they would come inside is I lost a lot of potato, onions, and garlic is because they'll find your row of parsnips or your row of carrots or your row of garlic or onions. And once they find it, you can literally see them disappear one after another. And so sometimes it's not gophers, sometimes it's little voles. I've seen baby voles that small. So, there's a degree I do use traps and all, and there's a degree you just have to live with it. They're probably doing as much digging under there as the turnip is, or what. I mean, the radish is doing its digging. But everything has its plan. But certainly one of the reasons a farmer turns to divine providence for help. Sometimes when it gets out of your hand or you have too much work to do, what is the priority? I could go further, expand and brush mulch where I'd like to have the house, but the priority sometimes is what is to be harvested, what food can be, what is the next thing to save up for winter. I probably eat now 50 to 70% of my food, of my diet comes from the farm. And produces far more than I can, so I'm constantly giving away the rest. Right. And if I can't give it away and I couldn't harvest it, it still is going to compost. It's not being the birds eat it, whatever. The animals feeding the trees that I will be eating from. This is the Idaho state flower, the Syringa. So as you are expanding your garden, there's some things you might just leave. This is I do prune it, and it's very beautiful. It has a smell of oranges. It's also, I think, called the mock orange, beautiful 4-petaled flowers, as you can see here, the remnants of the seed in 4 little coverlets on the petal and on the seed. And so it really adds beauty. I'll show you one other space, if we can go back to it, where I left something. Okay, like this is a weed where this tool would work very handily. This is, what's the thistle that grows around here that's purple? Not Canadian thistle. But anyway, I can't think of it right now. Knapweed. This is knapweed, so it's good for the bees. Everybody else says it's a noxious weed or whatever. But notice how I get down there and it helps pull that up. Just like that, just loosening a little bit. It breaks up the lock, right? Just a little bit so the root comes out very smoothly. And this is new territory, so old territory probably ripped out. If this gets bigger, of course the roots are massive, you're pulling up a lot of dirt. This will oftentimes just going in there somehow and comes right out. And of course, feed the next. I like to feed the edible trees, right? These are violets, I think they're violets. They're edible, a little bit bitter, and they propagate just by seed. You'll see little seedlings have gotten as far up there, and so might as well leave it. They're beautiful. And they also tell me when the rabbit's around, because a rabbit likes it, and you'll start seeing them disappear, mow down. It tells me I have rabbits. So there's a couple purposes. You leave it. If it takes over, then yeah, I've had plants that I've had to tear out that just took over, deep-rooted, was it false box? I think it's called false box. I had a bunch over there. And it was just all of a sudden just took off, and I had to really, and it took a whole day to pull it out. Big orange roots, and you don't find it in the forest because the deer eat it, but it's there. But it grows very, very beautifully here, and I think it's called false box. But this seems to just be doing fine here. It's kind of neat. I like and look how it's still late in the summer. It's still reproducing. I mean, it's still flowering. So there's a few things I'll leave and then just let it go, and you see it propagate, and then you got food. This is carrots going to seed. Yeah. And this is probably a massive carrot. I'll pull this one out. Let's see, is this one worth pulling out? You ready? You want to see a massive carrot? By the way, I didn't plant this. I planted the seed a year or two ago. I'm going to show you an area where I have what is finally getting permanent culture for annual crops, right? So let's watch this guy. No water, didn't plant it this year, and it's grown from seed probably planted some years ago, a year or two ago. And there's another carrot there. So now what's happening, you see this, looks like a weed. Right. Is now a carrot. Okay, so it might be in the way. Now what looks like a hawthorn is actually the roots of a stressed plum tree, right? You've probably seen that at Paul's place. I think we're done here. By the way, around each tree, I threw away some buckwheat seed, and I see some vetch, which is in the pea family, growing around it. And this year I'm leaving it because that is now can be food for it. The buckwheat is oftentimes will starve the area of any other plant, and of weedy roots starve them of moisture, and then these are vetch is a nitrogen fixer, and so as long as I keep it in control, they can get pretty big, and you don't want them going to seed and then you have a bunch of weeds to pull. But I think it's a little happy accident that will actually provide better nutrition for your plant. As they die, they're fixing nitrogen from the air. This is the first time in about 10 years that I've had a wood pile, because I really felt good this last winter, especially doing broccoli sprouts and changing my diet in some areas. eating about a quart of broccoli sprouts a day starting the end of November. And when I hopefully, Lord willing, have a house here, I want to develop several systems I've been learning about. Number one is a rocket stove that uses about at least 1/10 of the wood. I probably had enough wood from just pruning my orchard last year that I could power a conservative, well insulated, whatever home for that winter. And there is some of it right there. And of course, you saw that pile of dead trees. That, it's amazing how much you can get from so little once you have the right systems. And of course, these trees could, I could use or give it away by them, but I'm just seeing how if you really couldn't use mechanization on your farm, you can grow a lot of food, and you can chop things by hand and do the branch mulch and whatever. You do the best you can, but you can survive, but you have to be pretty smart. And the Lord gives wisdom to those who ask, and He certainly has given me a lot of wisdom now, especially as I'm old with the rods in my back and health challenges, and part-time to do this. So I've been really, really blessed. The other, and I might as well mention it here, if I developed it like I would, I was planning on putting a 30 by 90 greenhouse on this pad, be taking out the sheds and all, but also had planned on somewhat of a solar greenhouse here. But I want to recommend people to a YouTube video. Russ Finch, he's in his 80s, a retired mailman in Alliance, Nebraska. And if you look on YouTube, Nebraska retiree uses Earth's heat to grow oranges in snow.
Where he has the sunken...
Right. And you have to realize he's doing this for his house. If someone doesn't want to do his greenhouse, his house is on this system too. And that's probably more applicable to the average person who won't want to get into a big greenhouse. Start your house on that with that 40 to 50 degree even temperature coming in from 8 feet under, 90 feet out, 8 feet trench, 8 foot deep trench, and simply the rubber or the plastic pipes are laid, that catch it, and then you just have to ventilate that. And then you have to either, if you want to cool it a little bit more, I don't see why in summer, or heat it a little more in winter, maybe. If you're eating healthy, I noticed this last year from having to keep the house up in its 80s like an old man and white hair. I actually kept it much, much cooler because I felt better. If you can digest your food, you can feel good and warm. And cool is better than hot for health. It really is. It's amazing. You won't believe it. We sometimes don't feel it, but it does work. So, while speaking of that, let's go right to the sprouts. There's many people say, do something to make a change. Plant a tomato in a pot. Something, even one thing is making a change. Sprouts is what a farmer can do in the winter. I don't have animals like I did chickens and sheep some years ago till my heart started to act up. And so this past year I did very well on broccoli sprouts, tremendous nutrition. And what I have found, make sure you have stainless steel tops. The plastic won't let you pour water. Once I close the lid for the first draining, I don't want to keep reopening, closing, and it seems the plastic very hard. So I got on eBay. You can get these lids rather inexpensively. You can pour water in, it drains quickly out, and you don't have it, trying to glug, glug, glug. You just don't pour water over the whole thing on this side. Soaked for about 12 hours, more or less. Depends on your temperature outside. I don't sprout in the heat now. Broccoli does real well in the cool. Then shaded, so it's in a cabinet. I have found the fastest system when I'm doing eating a quart of sprouts a day. I need about 5 to 6 of these going all the time. So I have found putting a little screen at the bottom I don't know what you call that. Like an oven screen.
Sure.
Okay. And you tip it like this. That makes perfect drainage. And then I just take that whole thing and slide it into the cabinet. And I leave the cabinet door a little ajar so I don't forget about it. But once you're on a routine, it takes literally 2 minutes to go through the whole system as long as I have the water in the pitchers ready to and I'm literally can grab on the counter 2 at a time to drain. And then the last morning that you're ready, you put it into a window or a lighted area where it's not direct sunlight. Very, very important. So it can still be like a cloth curtain, but no direct sunlight. So in a corner of the kitchen's fine, corner of your kitchen counter. You have it up like this, drained, and they will green in 2 to 3 hours. Wow. Sometimes after an hour of prayer, I come back and they're green. Then, by lunch, I'll process 1 or 2 of them, right? And I found the fastest way to process them is to get the right size container, like from a fast food, you buy them, or from a store that has fast food, and put holes in the lids with the hole punch, then slip your sprouts in directly like that. You might have to tap them down a little bit. And you close it, and you have restaurant or store fancy sprouts. You feel spoiled. But I've learned this system has been so quick, it keeps my sprouts sometimes for 3-4 days when I have 3 or 4 piling up. And then what I do is the fastest way to eat the sprouts. Take a scissors, chop your bowl, take some and chop it in a bowl, put in nuts or celery or radishes or apples or whatever. And whatever you want as sauce if you want. I mean, it's totally up to you, but I found that if it's with something like nuts, it goes down faster. Broccoli sprouts are very good for you, but it can be an acquired taste. And for some people, spice it up. So was that a little education?
That was.
Okay.
That's different than the way Matthew does it too, so
another thing I have found, if I'm down to like a overflow of just like 5 I'm using, I will use a little spacer to keep it like that. And then I can actually fit in the 6th one like that, right, for drainage. And then you do want to keep these clean every once in a while, go in and hydrogen peroxide or disinfect. What you don't want to do is have water start to get contaminated doing sprouts. You want to be accurate, but I have it down to a system on my very, very busy schedule. It's 2 minutes in the morning, 2 minutes at night. It's very, very quick. I can't afford to, dilly-dally. But in the darkness the whole time until it's ready to get the light has been tremendous difference as far as growing nice sized sprouts. However, beans and things can go a little bad in the heat, so I don't have very much insulation in my camp trailer, but it works for now. What else will we say? A lot of the food that I'm harvesting goes right into quart freezer bags. I process it. So like the peas, I'll strip the strings off the pea. They're edible snap. The variety I really like now is the Oregon Giant snow pea, I think. Here's some of the seed. Oregon Giant sugar pod pea. And of course I've saved my own seed as well. It also has less damage by the pea weevil, which Idaho is one of 4 states to have a lot of pea weevil damage. So we really can't grow pea seeds without, chemicals or whatever. But I find that this blossom, it has bigger leaves, so as a microgreen, much, much better than most peas. And then bigger leaves also, and like more blossom, that must prevent them from wanting to get to that emerging little pod that they love to drill their eggs into. And then those eggs, like maggots, go and find each pea and then damage the pea. And if you break it open, the pea will have a pea weevil in it.
Really?
Yeah. This
Never seen them before.
Yeah, little black, little tanks, you know, little armored tanks. Real hard shell. A little bit about seeds. I get, you saw all the bean seeds, most of them are dry beans. There's quite a few places in Oregon that are like a family, a network of growers that know one another, that do well in Oregon, the Oregon area, for getting back to our roots. So adaptive seeds, resilient seeds, uprising organics. What I'll do is the first year, I'll test like several varieties of parsnip. I'll tell you about saving parsnip seed. Then the next year I have the variety I want. I'll order a whole lot of it. Because parsnip is in 2-year cycle, I had to order the second year because the seed is still waiting the first year, right, from last year. So then I ordered an ounce of seed and sort it and use little packets to get a much higher quality seed, to pick out the very best and darkest and whatever, right? Then I plant this, and I'm getting better genetics right off the bat by me helping the sorting. And so instead, they can't sit there and sort, but I can. With my limited space and what I want to work with, I can select the very best for my farm and make what is just every square foot has been labor, of years of labor in the past, or can now really pay off by putting in that's how you get those carrots that are massive, right? You're constantly looking for better genetics. And it takes a little time, and this is something you do off hours or winter or whatever, but and sometimes in the middle of a season, because how important that is. So you pay extra. That was $18, but I'll hopefully never have to purchase it again, as I've got the stock going for this year. Parsnips don't last very long, 1 or 2 years. Their seeds are one of the most fragile, perishable. For instance, the garbanzo bean did the first time last year. I did black Sicilian. This year I'm doing black Kabuli from Uprising Seeds. And they seem to be doing very well, and you can actually eat the green pods right now if we have a moment, if we get there. I'll be able to do that. Scissors. As you're harvesting and pulling up, and hopefully if we have time, we'll pull up like a turnip. You can chop off the tops, save the center leaves for green, the most tender, and then the bottom stems you can chop up and bag for stir fries. So the big leaves can, it's good compost. Unless you're starving, you can feed an army with the leaves, right? But basically, one of the principles is, if I hand you this carrot, I would do you a service by taking off the top, because right now this carrot is trying to feed the leaves. It's always trying to feed the highest. As you see sprouts on a tree, it's always trying to feed the upward growth. So if you want the carrot to stay tender, you would cut this off. So it's great to hold a bunch of carrots and say, oh, wow, look what I have. But you eventually want to, if you want to think about it, to not continue to lose the nutrition, you want to cut that top off as quickly as possible. You can research the internet on that. Okay, also, even though I don't sell my products, I give it mostly to churches, the excess to churches and to friends and neighbors and benefactors, I still will always use good bags for everyone else. I'll reuse these bags it's my grocery store. Really, literally. I don't go to town sometimes for weeks except to get mail, maybe one day a week to get mail, run errands, and so on. But I'll go weeks and weeks without getting food, as long as I have the staples, stored or whatever. But I always use fresh bags. I put them in a bucket, so I cover it, and even cover this with a rag, right? So I don't have to keep dusting it. And then pretty much everything is stored. I even have some bags. After I put it in this bag, I usually will put it in this bag and hand it to the person, so they get to see what they're getting, and that it's in fresh bags, just as if it was at the grocery store. Okay. This is a handy tool for chopping the comfrey as we were talking about. I would use dirtier gloves, but it also is good at this time. This is my third pruning of the vineyard. And in the vineyard we have a problem if we don't have a lot of air. You want to be super careful. Get a very, very heavy knife. You don't want it super sharp. But I like a knife for the fact, you know, it's a very heavy blade, right? Very heavy handle. It's not a wimp. That's a nice thick blade. I like a knife. It's like a machete, but a lot more I can get right in and not cut like a vine as I'm cutting something else. And right now this row needs pruning. I want a lot of airflow under, right? Because we have a problem with damp falls. And so you want to be super careful. If you don't know this and it doesn't cut, it can slide down on you, right? But I usually will see, this is the first year I've gone to more than 2 bunches that I leave. We'll go into the full 3 bunches on the wine grapes. This row is table grapes, but get some practice on a little one if you want, or use a pruners. But it's really fast. I've seen some videos of people doing it, and it's just, but always watching. You're always looking. There's no grapes there. I could take the whole thing out, but you want to be able to walk down, right? And you can get to a point when you know how it works and you're very, very careful, right? This is why I have eye protection. And see how it catches? You want to be real careful it's not going to catch you. And I accidentally took out some grapes. This is Cannabis, but not too bad. It's fairly loaded. It's its second year. This tells me it is stressed, and so I'm not worried about dropping it, right? And you can see I did this yesterday or the day before. I also chopped for the second time comfrey plants right here at the ends. And I've fed it in the past years, but these are now so green that I'm now feeding some trees over there. So again, you know, you'll have suckers from the ground. This is obviously too long, wherever that is. You might have to saw it, right? Because you want to be careful if it won't chip. And you want to be careful too, if you're doing it like this, it will tend to go into you, right? So I'm not good at, you know, machete safety, but I'll tell you this tool has really, really helped. If you're very careful, very alert, it saves a lot of time. Now I do net my grapes. These are Liam Malo, and I think you get an idea of how loaded they are. It's a wine grape. Wine grapes are going to be a lot less skin ratio per juice, which is what gives you your flavor. This, I would actually take this off because these are late bloomers, right? It's rebloomed. I would be sure to take it off, and I was actually collecting, right now I'll leave it drop. Right, there's a volunteer carrot, believe it or not. Hyssop is a little tart, acquired taste. But then again, you know, can go right through here. Anything too high, and if it's too hard, just saw it. And this has gotten dull because as I was on the ground doing this, you run into the wood, right? So here's some more. You can see a little bit of that. Your end grapes usually tend to do very, very well. There's a little bit better picture. Now if we come back through here, this is, begins with an M, Marquette. I've had it ripen the second week of August. Very early ripening. Liam Malo, again, are 90 days. From bud to harvest, 90 days. They're not the Mediterranean variety grapes. They're, you know, further north. I like the Marquette. Did have issues with funguses on the grapes, but hopefully that's, you know, it's an issue in the spring, but it does look like they're doing fairly good so far. But they tend to mummy rot, and then it's hard to make a good wine out of it. I don't drink much wine, but I put a lot of wine in veggie, you know, my used my leftover wines in veggie dishes. That way it takes out the alcohol, but I do get the mineral value, the antioxidants and all. The grapes are doing well. They were first planted, some of these, in 2013, and in 2015 about 7 of them produced. One of my best producing was the Reliance, but then birds got them. As soon as I realized that, I had to net them. I also have to net them with a very fine net, just like a curtain net. I'll actually go to thrift stores and get the curtain, a light colored curtain net, tan, yellow, pink, blue, white. And the reason for it is to keep out the damage. Once these are ripe, the yellow jackets and bees, well, we call bees, but yellow jackets will go in very, very aggressively, and you won't have grapes left. And you'll see nothing but the shells of grapes. And so half to thin, and it's a whole thing. Now I will take something you can get from Walmart, a thin fabric, not fabric, but like a netting. I like green. I like anything that alerts the birds that it's there. If it's black, they usually can't see it, and they can get tangled up. But I'll pin the curtain up so I can use it year after year. Shears, I think, is what they call them. This is my nursery. Usually is out there on the table, right? Now in the heat, you see how it's in the cool. And this is where I water. This is parsnips. Again, trees and all kinds of goodies, beans and Brussels sprouts and kale. This is, I'm putting an arbor over here for cool crops, right? I'm growing these grapes bit by bit. This is a very special spot. This is lettuce that went to seed and has started, all of this is planted by itself.
Really?
The carrots started here 2-3 years ago, and they've gone out and they keep sowing, so some are going to seed. And so I could harvest the lettuce, but at this point, I kind of want to leave it, right? They were just absolutely beautiful heads, but they're nice, even spaced. The wood chips probably help thin it out because very little gets through it.
Right.
And so this is actually starting to turn into permanent culture of an annual crop.
That's the goal.
And so I'll show you the carrots that luckily I harvested already. Some carrots that I didn't plant.
Nice.
That
You didn't even plant them.
That you get. Of course, I planted it some years ago, but that is so neat, right? To start harvesting what you. Of course, I had to weed that, so you want to keep selecting what's good, but eventually it grows so thick there's no more weeds, right? So that's what I would do for a customer and then drop it in the bag.
Now, do you sell at farmers markets or anything?
No, I could, but it's just too much time off the farm. Right now I'm at a point that I enjoy giving it to folks.
Oh, that's for me? Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
So what I want to show you, the one thing I have to show you, I've just sowed turnips in here. The screens are to keep the birds out, because wherever you have water, they want to get worms, right? Parsnips in between the peas here.
Oh, wow.
And of course they want to ruin your peck where your seeds are, and you'll lose a lot. And those peas mostly are for drying now, for seeds, right? I've harvested the ones for, and then they go here, and when I'm cleaning buckets out, I can pour the water there and not erode the soil, right? Okay, so what I want to show you is how I sift the soil to lay that row down when, that you need for fine seeds. So you go like this. In an old compost pile or worms have been in or whatever it is, right? And I'm actually creating this bed, going to finish this bed one day. So then, if I don't have the full setup set up, by setting me up. And let's see, I need a shovel. And set this up like this and rock it, right? And if you got a few rocks in there, it helps it sift it, right? And then you might have to reach in and do like this, and you dump the rock, and you end up with you know, 1/4 inch, or that's 1/2 inch mesh. It usually works really, really nice. The other way, when you need to do a whole bunch of it, is you spread it on a screen with tubs under there. I take a pitchfork and go back and forth, and then pick the screen up, and you see my rock pile and junk pile. Okay? And you can do a lot. Then, of course, from there, if I need to carry it, these can get pretty heavy and pretty full. I then go like this, right? So I'm not wasting it everywhere. Okay. And then, let's say I need to plant in this beautiful empty weed-free space, right? I get down to the dirt, and if I want to baby it a little at a time, I'll use this tool, right? Or if I want to get serious, a little more serious, I'll do this and pour a perfect bead, right? See that? Okay. And if I really am serious and pressed for time, I'll walk down a row like this, right? And then, so there's contact with dirt to the dirt for a root to grow, right? Then I'll go and pack it, just one time down, just level it, right? Something to grab the seeds, plant my seeds, maybe put in some stakes, right? Maybe. As you expand your farm, you do less and less work, right? And then, at the end, after the seeds, depending how deep they need to be, right? Again, just it depends. If it's just a little, it's just a little, right? And then, maybe you have to cover it from the birds and then water it. And then in this time of the heat, we need to water 3, 4, 5 times, because I've had seeds that I was watering once a day, and they would grow and germinate, and then it would bake, and they fried, and they didn't come up. And they only came up where there was the shade of a tree to keep that coolness. So I'm watering these like 2 or 3 times a day. And as long as I see moisture, it's fine. But then they're thriving by the time we get into the cooler months. So this is part of my fall garden. This is garbanzo beans. These are radishes that I've pulled the radishes out, and I've selected the radish that I wanted to let grow for seed. You can, on the younger ones of these, actually eat the whole pod for stir fry, but you see the massive size these radishes get to, right? This is a cherry bell variety, but I'm always selecting the very best to go to seed. I don't want to have some little runt. Now, it'll still grow, right? But I don't want runts. I want just the very, very best. This is my first year with this, I believe it's black kabuli garbanzo bean, and you see all these little pods? Yeah. Okay? Those are edible. You might need to harvest with gloves. If you're not used to that waxy thing, it can be an irritant, but usually there's 1 or 2 of these, and I'll let you taste it. Of course, these turn black. It's a chickpea, you know, for hummus, but it has an acquired taste. It's kind of nutty. And you can eat it right now. This is what I'd like the mulberries, the size of the mulberries to look like, the size of the leaf. and the depth of color. Very, very good. But I have birds come, keep landing on branches and breaking them, and then that's my food, right? They pick what food I get to eat, but they want to keep landing on it. So, and I'm learning how to propagate them as well. And I think we're done. Here's another winter chop station. I cut some trees down in the forest through the winter. I have a sled, you know, one of those tubs tied up that I sled the wood up. And here's that pile of branches that I can be used anywhere. And here's some of the pile of the branches here as well. And of course, I'd love to get in here and get, you know, all of the weeds out, but you can only do what you can do, and eventually that will. I'm reclaiming down here. We have nut trees and all. Oh, here's, I wanted to show you the covers. The sunflower is the symbol of gratitude because it's always facing the Lord, right? But yeah, this is a real hot spot, and I've had a lot of trouble getting a tree to grow in here. But notice, this gets now the morning sunlight. If it was really stressed, I'd put it down, and by having partial shade, it's doing very, very well, right? So as soon as you see a tree struggle, sometimes just covering it and letting it stay cooler is able to do very well. This is a pecan tree that's struggling. You can see the colors are a little off, but it is filling out in darker colors, so it's doing well. These are 2 pecan trees down here. This is my largest walnut tree. There's another walnut tree down there, and of course this is ready for branch mulch, but you can see the weeds have gotten a little high, and I need to come through a blade and cut these before they get too many, before they start flowering and then they get all over and re-inoculate the weed everywhere. So wonderful. I think it's called prickly lettuce, but and it's good biomass for the future. Maybe I don't have my belt on the right setting. I'll put it a little tighter here. This is chard up there, red romaine, and another walnut tree. This is parsnips. Takes quite a long time, 21 days or so to get growing. And this is Joan rutabaga. Found out it's one of the best rutabagas in my trials to grow. And then this is turnip. It takes about 60 days to grow. Delicious turnip, but however, the seed got mixed in with gill feather turnip. I like the turnip because it's juicy and can be eaten raw and doesn't have a hot taste. If you got one more minute, I'll show you the garlic in the barn. Again, another tree. And 2 mulberries and another tree there. I have very good. This is the garlic that's been is now curing in the barn. It's the least amount I've had, but I'm blessed to have what I have. But you can see I hang them with very simple 2 fence clips up there to 10-foot T-posts. So it can be used for garlic, or it can be used out. Those T-posts can be taken out and used, like in the vineyard. This is my largest variety and the easiest to grow. I've grown some varieties that had too many anomalies, like you know, garlic up here and garlic, side garlic. The reason for this right here is the sun comes through that vent, and you cannot have sun hit it in any time in the process. This is some of my largest garlic. I always put the largest garlic in the back for seed, and then the front I can give away that or eat it myself. So some of these are probably a good 2.5 inches, if you can catch that. That's a Inchilium red artichoke soft neck. I don't do too many hard necks because they don't keep as long, but this is an exception. A friend gave it, and it really is a beautiful garlic. They keep about 3 months, maybe to Christmas if you're lucky. The artichoke soft necks keep for about 6 months, and then your silver skins One is Nootka Rose, and the other is just farm garlic. I call it farm garlic because I basically got it when I saw a bunch of bags of good garlic at Walmart. And that I actually call farm garlic, in that the silver skin keep up to 12 months. And it's not because I can't keep it long, it's because I've used them up that I run out. So, a little hot, a little worrisome when it gets to 90 and 100 degrees in here, because that does affect it, but you can tell it's a little cooler. At least there's a vent, ventilation in here. This is also where I did a lot of wood, like I said, from the pruning of the trees. And I don't know if I have bags of the wood here. I have just bags and bags of the branches that you prune in winter. And most of it's out there already in the compost. I also get burlap so I can process here. Had a bunch of turnip seed drying, and then I have some of the prunings I actually get canes from. So